Obviously, this is all relevant to your final assignment. So, we're going to talk about it. So until today, we've gone through face-to-face interviews as the main sort of part of interviewing the window. Today we're going to have a look at going to use an email and why they work, why they don't necessarily work, and what are the challenges and some of the things that we need to understand, when we are completing such interpreters. So let's start with the foreign one. Obviously, there are a few benefits to them, and they are listed there up on that slide. It's obviously less stressful for those of you who might be a little bit anxious about interviewing.
Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of a hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty.
The growth of the modern state brought with it the development of mass political parties and the emergence of professional politicians. An individual whose occupation is the struggle for political power may pursue it in two ways. First, a person who relies on their political activities as their main source of income is said to live off politics. In contrast, a person who engages in full-time political activities without receiving income from them is said to live for politics. In such a political system, recruitment to positions of power is likely to be drawn from a property-owning elite, who are typically not entrepreneurs. However, this is not to imply that such politicians will necessarily pursue policies that are wholly biased toward the interests of the class from which they originate. Families are always related to the economy, the politics, the culture of the society. In herding societies, young people go out when they're 10 or 12 years old, and they hang out with the sheep or the goats or whatever the herd is. That produces a kind of a loose bond between the pre-adolescents and their parents. In industrial societies, we tend to keep kids in school for longer, and then college is that point when they might break, or after college, depending on what they're doing. In agrarian societies, families have lots of kids and put them to work. They structure themselves as large families and put them all together in one home. The main point is that families are not separate from society. Families and the economy and the politics are all wrapped up all together.
Lead-in time is the amount of time that elapses between a business placing an order with a supplier for more stock or raw materials and the delivery of the goods to the business. Businesses want the lead time to be as short as possible so that they can meet their customer orders and minimize the time between paying for the stock and receiving the feedback from the customer. However, this may not happen due to a number of factors, such as delays in the supplier receiving the order or the breakdown of the supplier's lorries delivering the stock to the business.
What was interesting and revealing about younger and middle-aged views on old age was how relative these were to the individual's own age. Those in their teens regarded 40 as old, whereas those in their 40s thought 70 or 80 was old. For many, health was seen as a determining factor in deciding who is old, and many young participants commented on how fit and active their grandparents are, while others thought ill health and dependence were an inevitable part of aging. The majority of participants, however, regarded old age as something negative, and many expressed fear of growing old.
Bruck and her colleague Mark Newman studied who swapped messages with whom on a popular online dating platform in the month of January 2014. They categorized users by desirability using PageRank, one of the algorithms behind search technology. Essentially, if you receive a dozen messages from desirable users, you must be more desirable than someone who receives the same number of messages from average users. Then they asked, how far out of their league do online daters tend to go when pursuing a partner? I think people are optimistic realists. In other words, they found that both men and women tended to pursue mates just 25% more desirable than themselves. So they're being optimistic, but they're also taking into account their own relative position within this overall desirability hierarchy. And the study did have a few more lessons for people on the market. I think one of the take-home messages from this study is that women could probably afford to be more aspirational in their mate pursuit.
For the first time, Japanese researchers have conducted a real-life experiment that shows how some traffic jams appear for no apparent reason. They placed the 22 vehicles on a single track and asked the drivers to cruise around at a constant speed of 30 kilometers an hour. At first, traffic moved smoothly, but soon the distance between cars started to vary and vehicles clumped together at one point on the track, but the jam spread backward around the track like a shockwave at a rate of about 20 kilometers an hour. Real-life jams move backward at about the same speed.
Well, in 2004, we integrated ticketing in Southeast Queensland, so we have introduced a paper ticket that allowed you to travel across all the three modes in Southeast Queensland, so bus, train, and ferry. And the second stage of integrated ticketing is the introduction of a smart card. And the smart card will enable people to store value, so to put value on the card and then to use the card for traveling around the system.
A majority of U.S. high school students say they get bored in class every day, and more than 1 out of 5 has considered dropping out, according to a survey released on Wednesday. The survey of 81,000 students in 26 states found 2/3 of high school students complain of boredom, usually because the subject matter was irrelevant or their teachers didn't seem to care about them.
That brings us to the CEO's second duty, building everyone, or more accurately, building the senior team. All the executives report to the CEO, so it's the CEO's job to hire, fire, and manage the executive team. From coaching CEOs, I actually think this is the most important skill of all. Because when a CEO hires an excellent senior team, that team can keep the company running. When a CEO hires a poor senior team, the CEO ends up spending all of their time trying to do it with the team and not nearly enough time trying to do it with other elements of their job. The senior team can and often does develop the strategy for the company, but ultimately it's always the CEO who has the final go-no-go decision on strategy.
Social harm originates out of a series of debates within criminology about the narrowness of the definition of crime, that essentially focuses on individual acts of harm, things like interpersonal violence, theft, so on and so forth. So the idea of social harm originally was to expand that notion of harm to encompass the harms that organizations and nation-states cause. But latterly, the idea of social harm really now transcends criminology. So there are a group of writers who think that, and I would include myself there, that actually there's something to social harm that could be very useful in terms of trying to understand the harms that occur within society, to produce an objective and well-rounded analysis of harm. There are some 250 million cars in America, 250 million cars in the country, with just over 300 million people. And most of those vehicles, of course, are gas-powered. This poses a huge challenge given the limited supplies of oil and the growing urgency of the global warming crisis. But there is good news, according to our guests today. And that is, we have the know-how and the technology to build sleek, fast automobiles that don't use gasoline. These vehicles of tomorrow are powered by hydrogen, electricity, biofuels, and digital technology, and they already exist. So what's stopping us from putting them on the roads? Our guests today will help answer that.
This year marks the 400th anniversary of the first permanent English settlement in America. A group of Englishmen, including John Smith, who later was befriended by Pocahontas, built a fort at Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607, 13 years before the Pilgrims crossed the Atlantic on the Mayflower. And for the past 14 years, Bill Kelso has been working to uncover the secrets of Jamestown.
Is that person really glad to see me, or are they just being polite? Some people struggle to distinguish a fake grin from a truly happy smile, and computers have found this task even more difficult, that is, until researchers develop a program to detect when a smile is genuine. Visual computing researchers at the University of Bradford in the UK started with software for simulating a changing facial expression. This program can examine a video clip of a human head and identify specific details around the eyes, cheeks, and mouth. Then the program tracks the details moving relative to each other as the face smiles. Next, the scientists had their program analyzing two sets of video clips. In one, subjects performed posed smiles.
You've heard about SARS, AIDS, and bird flu. Now, researchers from Australia claim we're about to be hit by a new epidemic, motivational deficiency disorder. According to the British Medical Journal, 1 in 5 people are said to suffer from motivational deficiency disorder, or MODID, and most don't even know they have it. Symptoms include being unable to get out of bed in the morning, being trapped on the couch,
My current research at the moment is really quite broad. I work at the interface between the arts and humanities, particularly archaeology, but trying to find questions which are difficult to answer unless you start integrating computing and visualization. So really, I work in this boundary between trying to understand cultural questions about the past, but those sorts of questions that you can't address unless you start reconstructing. Start modeling and visualizing past landscape objects and movement of people.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted, first of all, to have been appointed to this professorship. The role is going to be about public engagement in science. It is about marketing science accessible to as wide an audience as possible. It's about making it easier for our academics here at the University of Birmingham to talk about their research to the general public. And it's not just about a one-way flow of information. It very much is about dialogue. And one particular crop, almond in the US and now in Australia, is transforming the world of beekeeping and of bees. What has happened is that something serendipitous came along, that people found out, that doctors found out that almonds are good for you, a confection, but it's good for you. The Almond board got a very aggressive promotion going on for almonds. They actually, I just heard recently, send out sales reps to cardiologists at hospitals to promote the heart benefits of almonds. It is a very good promotion of almonds, and it's a legitimate promotion because they are healthy food.
It is about 100 years since that great Canadian-born physician, Sir William Osler, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, complained about the increasing influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the medical profession. He would be turning in his grave at the way the industry now dominates doctors' prescribing habits. It does this not only by direct and indirect pressure on the doctors themselves, but also by encouraging the public to ask for scripts.
Another way in which the industry exerts pressure on doctors is by offering us a variety of professional services. In one of these services, widely advertised to GPs, a company representative shows the practice manager how to use a company disc to trawl through the practice database, identifying patients with problems which might be treatable with the company's products. When that has been done, a company-sponsored nurse interviews the selected patients and draws up a management plan for the GP, which, if approved by the doctor, attracts a Medicare item number. One of these companies proudly announces that over 65,000 patients were assessed in this way in 2005. What, one may ask, is a pharmaceutical company doing assessing patients? It is surprising that no government or professional body has stepped in to prevent this commercially sponsored program.
I'd recommend that you all try to get hold of English in the Southern Hemisphere by Nalan and Watts, as this provides an excellent overview of the topics that we're going to be covering in this module. It's really our primary text. It has particularly strong sections on the history of English in Australia and New Zealand, examining in some depth how the language has developed in these countries. The sections on phonology and on vocabulary will be invaluable when you're doing the written assignment, which I'm going to be telling you about in a moment once I've given you the details of a couple of other essential references.
An important question about education is then, why do some types of students achieve success easily and others struggle to do well? Well, one theory is that there is a genetic reason for academic achievement. What I mean by that is a certain innate, measurable level of intelligence. Another frequently discussed theory is environmental factors, such as the effect of home and family upbringing. A final reason is related to the teaching and learning process within educational institutions and the way it is organized, administered, and assessed.
Barred owls can be found in dense forests right across North America. They feed on small mammals, fish, birds, and small reptiles, pretty much anything that comes their way. The barred owl grows up to half a meter tall and has emerged as a very adaptable nocturnal predator. Whereas they have been long thought to live in old-growth forests, they are now building up quite an urban population. In Charlotte, North Carolina, barred owls tend to nest in the cavities of the numerous willow oak trees that line the city's streets. Far from being endangered, the owls have expanded their range, and now in some places conservationists are worried about the effects they might have on other native species.
Before the beginning of the 1900s, the only way to obtain pearls was by collecting very large numbers of pearl oysters from the ocean floor by hand. The oysters, or sometimes mussels, were brought to the surface, opened, and searched. More than a ton of these had to be checked in order to find just 3 or 4 quality pearls. Divers often descended to depths of over 100 feet on just one single breath. Now, of course, this exposed them to hostile creatures and dangerous waves, not to mention drowning. In some areas, divers put grease on their bodies to conserve heat, and they held a large object like a rock to descend so they didn't have to exert effort going down. Today, pearl diving has pretty much been supplanted by cultured pearl farms. Particles are implanted in the oyster to encourage the formation of pearls, and this allows for more predictable production. The divers who still work do so mainly for the tourist industry.
Almost everyone has heard of the London Stock Exchange, but relatively few know anything about the London Metal and Commodity Exchanges. Yet these markets have a greater influence on world economies because they set global prices for some of the essential raw materials for industry and food manufacture. The LME provides three basic services to the world's non-ferrous metal trade. First, it is a market where large or small quantities of metal of a guaranteed minimum standard can be bought and sold on specific trading days. Second, it acts as a barometer of world metal prices. And third, it is a hedging medium. That is, it can help traders get some protection from price fluctuations that occur for economic, political, or financial reasons.
Lawrence Stephen Lowry, RBSRA, was an English artist. Many of his drawings and paintings depict Penlebury, Lancashire, where he lived and worked for more than 40 years, and also Salford and its surrounding areas. Lowry is famous for painting scenes of life in the industrial districts of northwest England in the mid-20th century. He developed a distinctive style of painting and is best known for his city landscapes populated with human figures often referred to as Matchstick Man. He painted mysterious unpopulated landscapes, brooding portraits, and the unpublished marionette works, which were only found after his death.
Those of you who've never heard the term Neo-Latin may be forgiven for thinking it's a new South American dance craze. If you're puzzled when I tell you it has something to do with the language of Romans, take heart. Over the years, many classes who have confessed they are not really sure what it is either. Some have assumed that they are so-called late Latin, written at the end of the Roman Empire. Others have supposed it must have something to do with the Middle Ages. Or perhaps it's that pseudo-Latin which my 5- and 7-year-old boys seem to have gleaned from the Harry Potter books, useful for spells and curses that they zip one another with makeshift paper ash ones. No, in fact, Neo-Latin is more or less the same as the Latin that was written in the ancient world, classical Latin. So what's so new about it? Those of you who've never heard the term Neo-Latin may be forgiven for thinking it's a new South American dance craze. If you're puzzled when I tell you it has something to do with the language of Romans, take heart. Over the years, many classes who have confessed they are not really sure what it is either. Some have assumed that they are so-called late Latin, written at the end of the Roman Empire. Others have supposed it must have something to do with the Middle Ages. Or perhaps it's that pseudo-Latin which my 5- and 7-year-old boys seem to have gleaned from the Harry Potter books, useful for spells and curses that they zip one another with makeshift paper ash ones. No, in fact, Neo-Latin is more or less the same as the Latin that was written in the ancient world, classical Latin. So what's so new about it?
So 2 decades later, what's changed? It's now widely recognized that just 20% of health outcomes are tied to medical care, whereas up to 70% are tied to healthy behaviors and what's called the social determinants of health. Basically, everything that happens to us for that vast majority of time when we're not in the doctor's office or the hospital. Healthcare executives now routinely remind us that our zip code matters more than our genetic code. And one healthcare publication even recently had the audacity to describe the social determinants of health as the feel-good buzzword of the year. My hero is Marie Curie. She was a Polish physicist and chemist working in France, and she conducted pioneering research on radioactivity. She was also the first woman who won a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie is my hero because she showed a lot of determination in following her career path and her passions. She also showed a lot of patience in working for years to receive results from her experiments. Marie Curie, she designed and built the first mobile X-ray machines. She worked on the front lines of the First World War, along with her daughter, saving soldiers.
Well, the banana is the first cultivated fruit. It's one of the food items that literally brought people out of the jungle, out of their hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and was there at the dawn of agriculture, which is what helped force human beings into communities. It's really one of the things that helped invent human culture. It's about 7,000 years of history, and the banana, from its center of origin, which is believed to be Papua New Guinea, spread out with people who traveled in boats across the Pacific, into the mainland of Asia, and all the way south to Australia, across Indonesia and Micronesia, and eventually they moved as far as Africa, and even possibly to Ecuador, all in this time, and all on paddle boats and wind-driven boats. For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has cast some doubt on this principle. After all, the authors of the report argue for culture. A company's build-up may be strong, but wrong. There is little point in every employee marching to the same tune if they are all marching in the wrong direction.
Also, malaria is something that is a very complex disease with this complex life cycle. That means that if you're going to eliminate it, you have to be able to target cute parasites in humans. You have to be able to target parasites in the mosquitoes, that mosquito population. And so that requires a lot of resources. It requires really good planning and a health system across all these different levels. And so I think the political capital that you need for that, the educational infrastructure you need for that, and the economic resources you need for that are quite a challenge.
For all his fame and celebration, William Shakespeare remains a mysterious figure with regards to personal history. There are just two primary sources for information on the bard: his works and various legal and church documents that have survived from Elizabethan times. Naturally, there are many gaps in this body of information, which tells us little about Shakespeare the man.